Hi, Teo.
Hi again, Sworup.
So we're here again today to discuss about dharma, as all good people should do. So dharma is a very complicated word, isn't it?
Dharma is a very complicated word.
Yeah, it means so much in so many contexts that it's kind of difficult to figure it out for like a podcast discussion kind of thing.
Exactly.
So so let's just begin with the most basic sort of root or etymological sort of source for the word dharma, and then we can proceed towards the context and where it's used and how it's defined according to different sources.
Yeah. Etymologically, it's hard to pin down. I mean, it just means the right thing. The good thing in any context. What would you say?
So there's been a source that I saw that's related to the word thra, meaning ground or firm, or like dharti has the same root. Right? So it's kind of the ground of everything, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I've seen that somewhere, but I'm not sure about like the exact source. So what context have you seen dharma being used in? So there's clearly like a religious connotation to it. It's like it can mean like teaching, it could mean the right thing to do, it could mean the rules that you're supposed to follow, it could mean in the Buddhist sense phenomena, right, or activity as such, and
in the most like non-mystical way, it can just mean the law. Like the law in any given case, property law, inheritance law, criminal law.
So like just to give a little bit more of a context on let's start with maybe the theological sort of side to it, right? Where do we encounter the word dharma as being this theological right thing to do? What sources can you identify with that kind of context?
What I'm familiar with is mostly the Buddhist stuff. That's where I've started. So in Pali, dharma would be dhamma. And in that context, it really means the Buddha's teaching, like explicitly his teaching, his sasana. So when you say dhammam saranam gacchami, it means you're going to scripture as a refuge, basically, to the whole corpus of all the information. Sometimes in Pali text, you'll see dhammata, which means like normalness, rightness. Like this is what's normal or expected in any given situation. So it's just, I mean, the closest English word I think is normative. For something to be dhammata, it means it's a norm. Maybe it's that way naturally, maybe it should be that way and we should enforce it, but dhamma just means the right thing. Where have you encountered it?
So in a more, let's say, theological sense, it's I think many places, including the Mahabharata, right, that discusses quite a bit on dharma. We have a deity, Dharma Raja, and Yudhishthir is the son of Dharma Raja, and then in that sense, therefore he's this noble, has to do the right thing at all points, this almost an example of perfectness that a king should be, or that anybody should be, So we encounter this dharma ideal, I guess, quite early on in the Mahabharata. And
does it show up in the Vedas?
I haven't seen the word itself as being theologically moved as dharma. The word that's usually used, I guess, for law or the way that things should be is the word rita, right? It's related to the Nepalese word, for example, for season, ritu, right? So the seasons change in a specific manner, in a specific way, and therefore there's a law to the seasons changing. And therefore rita is this universal law that it follows. And then less so theologically motivated as like a teaching or a religious sort of philosophical religious thing that one should adhere to. I haven't seen that in the Vedas yet. Coming to, let's say, so the idea of dharma being this things that we should follow, we get a number of texts that detail what one should do, right? So could you speak a bit about these texts, about some of the more prescriptory texts that prescribe the way one should act, that one's dharma should be? So what texts are these, and could you name a few, and maybe we'll go on from there.
Yeah, so we've kind of looked at, we've chosen a couple for today. That I think that are three pretty representative samples, because they're all quite different. So we have the Arthashastra, which you might know as like Indian Machiavelli, which is a complicated comparison for a lot of reasons, but it's about like what a king should do to get what he wants, and it's pretty ruthless. And you get a sense that what's dharma for a king? It's to take and to kill, to take territory, to take money, to take taxes, and kind of advance himself. And then so that way, artha, which is the Sanskrit word for, economics or purpose or aim or goal, is a sort of a dharma. Another one we have is the Manusmriti, the Manava Dharma Shastra, really it's properly called Manu's Dharma Shastra, where you get something a lot more like what you're talking about in terms of religious prescription, where there's certain rituals that have to be done at a certain time. Society has to be organized in a particular way, or very bad things will happen. It enforces certain relationships between family members. I think that's the classic example of Dharma Shastra. I think we'll do Arthashastra first, because it's very clear that Manu knows everything about Rajadharma. Like he's read the Rajadharma, and anyway, we'll get to it. And then finally, you mentioned the Mahabharata. The Mahabharata has a very interesting take, especially the Bhagavad Gita has a very interesting take on dharma as like a sort of total allegiance to God, giving oneself up to God, in this case Krishna, and a sort of faith, a devotion, really, bhakti. So it can mean a lot of different things.
So we will come to maybe the rule or the prescriptory rules, let's say. We can start with the Arthashastra, like you said, and it has it's purportedly written by Chanakya, Kautilya, where he has many names, right? Many of the people might know him from his famous Chanakya Niti as well, where the let's say the way of Chanakya, and we have so the Arthashastra is more for kings, right?
Or for ministers.
Or
it's
for
not
ministers,
always clear
true.
like who the political actor is.
So let's start with like the basics. Is the Arthashastra in any sense related to religious sort of a background, or is it purely a economical, political sort of book? What's going on?
Well, we have, from the quotes we kind of chose today, we have a moment where it gives itself a religious self-explanation. This might just be copied from Manu. We don't know. The two texts are very close to each other, but we have at the very beginning, this is the rationale that the Arthashastra gives for its own existence. The three Vedas, Sama, Rig, and Yajur, constitute the triple, and the Atharva Veda and Itihas Veda are the Vedas. So all of that together is the Vedas. Phonetics, ritual, grammar, we talked about Vyakarana, etymology, metrics, Chanda, and astronomy, Jyotishastra, these are the limbs, the Vedanga. So this is all the knowledge we have. The law, dharma, laid down in the triple Veda is of benefit because it enunciates the laws specific to the four social classes and the four orders of life. So immediately you get dharma as this like social enforcement mechanism. Authority is coming straight from the Vedas. In that sense, it's religious. What does this have to do with the king? Non-injury, truthfulness, purification, lack of malice, compassion, and forbearance, patience. These are common to all. The law so dharma is the system of morality. The law specific to someone leads him to heaven and to eternal bliss. The law specific to someone being specific to a particular caste. When it is violated, people are destroyed through intermixture. Yikes. Therefore, the king should not permit people to violate the law specific to each of them, for when they adhere to the law specific to each, they rejoice here and in the hereafter. Okay. So the foundation, the Arthashastra's relationship to dharma is that the dharma is this religious moral mandate, and the king needs to enforce it.
So it draws authority on the triple. By the triple, it means the three Vedas, right? Just a bit of a side note. What are these three Vedas? Because normally people are familiar with four, right? So what's going on with this triple being the three, and why is it the three and not the four?
The status of the Atharva Veda is interesting. There's a lot of scholarship on it, but the tradition often seems to think that you have these three Vedas and that the Atharva Veda is like a later edition. But it's also eternal, so it can't be a later edition. But it's very common. You'll see it just mentioned as a fourth one. Yeah. And scholars generally agree it's written later.
So what the Arthashastra is doing is it's saying that these Vedas are the source of knowledge. All we know is basically derived in some sense from the Vedas. We talked about the Vedangas being, limbs of the Vedas. And that's kind of where the Arthashastra is saying, okay, so these are the texts, and then these lay down sort of in principle what you're supposed to do, but then now I'm really sort of teasing the one sort of thread out and talking about what the king should be, right? And then it goes off on talking about how compassion is mercy and forbearance and so on. These are qualities that is common, or that is common to all of these, and therefore we should emulate, right? Does that apply to the king? Should a king always be merciful and compassionate? And what does the Arthashastra have to? Is the king's dharma to be this very noble, almost saintly figure that does no harm, or what's going on?
I mean, it's good that you mentioned there does seem to be two different types of dharma. Like there's a dharma for everyone about being moral and wonderful, and then there's dharmas that are specific to particular people and particular roles. And I think the Arthashastra will tell us what a king should do. Spoiler alert: it is a lot more ruthless than we might imagine from this talk about truthfulness and purification and compassion. It's kind of messy. So what strikes you about the Arthashastra?
So immediately we get a division, right? We get a division into the Varna system, right? And then we get a division according to the stage in life that one is in. And Kautilya, he goes and explains these stages and these four Varnas. And so he explains what a Brahmin is and what a Brahmin should do, right? And the purpose of a Brahmin is to study the Vedas, perform sacrifice, and teach, right? And then preserve the ritual, practices and such. And then the dharma of a Kshatriya is to lead, to again perform sacrifices. This is something that I find very interesting, is that all the four, except the last Shudra, the three sort of Varnas, all have to perform sacrifices. And then the after the Brahmins, the Kshatriyas and the Vaishyas have a duty of giving gifts, which is very interesting.
To whom?
So largely to the Brahmin sort of priests, almost as a payment, let's say, or for performing these various rites and sacrifices and so on, and preserving the dharma, as in that's the source of everything. So the Brahmins are preserving everything. And then it defines the role of the Shudra as just serving the upper castes and so on, and the role of the Vaishyas being merchants and agriculture and so on. So immediately we get a division into four based on, let's say, what they're supposed to in general be doing, right? But then we have another division based on, I wouldn't say age, but more of a stage in life. So these four stages being brahmachari, and then grihastha, and then vanaprastha, and then sannyasi. So can you elaborate on these four divisions based on stages?
I think the clearest example of that is in Manu. So we might wait until we get to Manu. But it strikes me too, this gets back to our thinking about what Shastra is doing and whether it's prescriptive or descriptive. It's describing the system of four varnas and four stages in life. And then at the same time, it's saying it's natural. It's saying that's the way it is. And then it's telling the king he has to enforce it. Or the world will end. Why does the king have to work kind of so hard to enforce something?
If it's natural.
If it's natural, But in terms of how the king is consolidating power, I think we might move into that.
So the king has to draw power from somewhere, right? so Kautilya goes into talking about the different schools that define, how a king holds his power, whether it's through money only or whether it's through territory. So how does a king actually become a king and sort of gain that power? What does Kautilya have to say on this?
So the Artha, I mean, that's the whole that's the whole text. So the Arthashastra is divided really into these two main sections, one about domestic policy and one about foreign policy. And the metaphor here is very interesting. Domestic policy is called the tantra, and the foreign policy is called the avapa. And this is a weaving metaphor, right? So the tantra is the warp.
Yeah.
It's the thread that runs vertically in the fabric. And the avapa is the weft. So it's your domestic policy that's really at the heart of it. And domestic policy involves picking the right ministers, knowing everything that goes on in your kingdom, and amassing as much money as you possibly can, largely through taxation. So I would say that's the foundation of it. And the chapters of the Arthashastra are, chapter 1, selecting ministers, training spies, testing loyalty. Chapter 2, hiring your bureaucrats, collecting your taxes, and storing what you've collected. Section 3 is justice and judges and suing for crime and property disputes. 4 is the surveillance state, and a really sophisticated surveillance state, disciplining your spies, interrogating enemies, eradicating domestic enemies through very sketchy means. And 5 is keeping the treasury full and maintaining sovereignty, making sure that if there is a dispute in inheritance, the right person sort of inherits the kingship. Chapter 6 starts to move into domestic affairs. But the king's dharma seems to be enormously practical. It has very little to do with one's ritual responsibilities or one's kind of cosmological place in the world. And it has everything to do with kind of how efficient the king is able to be.
Yeah. So the first chapter is devoted to, how you can set up ministers and spies and so on. So, and then later on, there seem to be very interesting chapters about how to train elephants and how to take care of elephants and how to take care of agriculture and taxation and so on, right? So, when talking about how the king should set up his ministers, there seems to be a lot of allusion to listening to the aged or the elders and the ones that are well known, right? And then a king should have trustworthy ministers who he should test on many occasions to see if they're worthy. So what tests should a king perform?
Well, let's go looking for a test. So this is book 1, chapter 10, verses 7 through 8 in the Arthashastra. A female wandering ascetic who has won the confidence of and is received with honor in the royal residence, so a spy in the court, should investigate each high official individually, saying, "The chief queen is in love with you and has made arrangements to meet with you. You will also receive a lot of money if you sleep with the queen." And if the minister says no, he's a man of integrity. And this is the secret relating to lust.
So this is essentially trying to weed out the good, trustworthy ministers from the bad. And what happens to the ministers if they don't sort of pass?
They're killed. They're killed quickly and publicly. They're made an example of. There's really no compassion. And there's truthfulness in the sense that everybody sees. Often the Arthashastra prescribes a lengthy public punishment followed by an execution so that people can see.
Yeah. So let's sort of talk about sort of a little bit of this spy network. So I'm reading from chapter 1. So verses 4 to 8 from the 11th passage, let's say.
And this is my summary of them.
Yeah. The king hires a special employee, right? An apostate recluse. So these are sort of ones who have, sort of left the household life. They're wandering as beggars or Buddhists or saints or sannyasis of sort. And to set up in the forest and look for wandering ascetics that are tired of being renunciants or just need money. so he's looking for essentially bad sannyasis, or essentially, sannyasis that are done with being a sannyasi. They're wanting to renounce renunciation, let's say, and they're hired as spies and expected to try and hire other ascetics who look and do the same. And I remember reading a specific way that the ascetic can gain trust of the people and then more efficiently act as a spy is, so the king will make arrangements with the spy, right? So the spy, in making arrangements to the king will tell the spy, I will make such and such announcement on a future date. Okay, so the king will tell the ascetic, I will make such and such announcement on a future date, and you as the ascetic or as this sannyasi are going to make a prediction today or soon on what I will be doing in the future. Right. And so the sannyasi goes on in public and then, he makes this pronouncement that the king is going to announce such and such and this is going to happen. And then the king does that a few days or a few weeks later. And then therefore the sannyasi gains trust of the people because he has just predicted what the king is going to say. So he's an actual sort of a mystical sannyasi. And therefore when people come to him with problems or with issues or, when he's just wandering about, right, people come to him and confess whatever they need to confess, or they ask advice, he can report that back to the king.
Exactly.
So this is a very sophisticated spy mechanism that the Arthashastra is prescribing as dharma to the king.
Exactly. And his Raja Dharma is basically subverting religious dharma because it's clear that the king does not take religion seriously.
Yeah.
There's all these moments where he's kind of preying on people's instincts to trust things like miracles, things like, magic. And he's manipulating the people in that way. I have another really good story. Where is it? Oh, here we go. This is in the section on filling the treasury.
Oh, wow.
How might one fill the treasury? By collecting taxes? No, in book 5, chapter 2, verses 41 through 44, this is my summary. The tax collector goes undercover as a miracle worker, a thaumaturgic ascetic, it's called, and tells the villagers that there's a demon in the tree, and in a tree. And then he can get rid of the demon, but only for money. If people believe him, that's great. They give him money, the money goes to the king. If somebody doesn't believe him, then it's the spy's job to poison that person so that he can tell all the other people the demon got angry and killed him.
Wow.
The demon, so we really need to get out of this, to get rid of this demon. Now it's a real problem. Give me more money. Which is, bizarre for a king to have that sort of attitude towards ascetics and holy men.
I mean, in the text that we'll discuss later, the king is prescribed all these moral qualities. Like a good person is equivalent to a good king, and then maybe we've seen that a little bit with stories of Rama maybe, and the stories of Yudhishthir, right? A good person naturally will make a good king. But then the Arthashastra seems to be saying not quite that, and maybe that's why, the connotation with Machiavelli is because a king might have to do some pretty evil stuff in order to fulfill his dharma as king.
Exactly. Right. And like you said, really sophisticated stuff. What's remarkable to me about the finding ascetics part is that you're not just going to find an ascetic in the woods and hiring them. You're hiring someone to start a pyramid scheme to hire other people who will hire other people. I mean, it's this really sophisticated bureaucratic imagination where we're really building like a department of fake monks who are spying for the government.
So I read another one from the spies to find people who are avoiding paying taxes. Okay, so this is book 4, chapter 4, verse 3 to 5, right? The tax collector should post in the countryside agents acting as undercover as thaumaturgic ascetics, renouncers, traveling holy men, wandering troubadours, charlatans, entertainers, diviners, soothsayers, astrologers, physicians, mutes, deaf persons, idiots, blind persons, traders, artisans, craft. So he's basically saying everybody.
Anyone could be a spy.
Anyone could be a spy. Tavern keepers, vendors of flat bread, cooked meat, boiled rice.
Watch out, it's the roti salesman. They're always coming.
And then and then they are used to find the honesty and dishonesty of people, and anybody, if they suspect, so if a meat seller sees a guy who, he's not supposed to be earning that much, but he's buying meat every day, maybe he has a secret source of income, and then he'll go and report that to the king, and in some sense that's his dharma as a spy, right? That's his duty in some sense to making the state better in some sense. So this is very interesting dharma that's coming out from the Arthashastra, this is like the dharma of the king.
It's especially tricky because if it were his dharma, then he should want to do it because it comes naturally.
Yeah.
But here's why they do what they do. Spy loyalty, Book 1, Chapter 12, verse 19. He, the king, should appoint double agents after taking their wives and children into custody. And he should find out such agents. So it's not just that they're doing it because, it's spy shastra and it's their dharma and they have to. The king is holding them hostage. So there's just no part of this whole system that's in good faith at all. It's quite sinister.
So to the king, what I meant was that is the spice, the dharma, right?
Exactly.
So this comes into contrast with many other religious sort of theological explanations on what dharma is, right? So maybe we can move forward to something like the Manusmriti, which obviously shares many things with the Arthashastra, right? But obviously there's a big difference as well in what a king should be. While the Arthashastra just happens to pass by the Vedas and then draws just authority from them, right? Saying that, Kautilya, has sort of brought about the essence of the Arthashastra in some sense. The Manusmriti is more theosophist, if that makes sense, in the way it theologizes a lot of these things. So the Arthashastra also has the caste system, right? It also has the Varna system. But the Manusmriti does that same thing as well, right? But then there seems to be a core difference in that Manu is now the divine king, right? So Manu is supposed to be the ancestor of all Manavas, the child of Brahma, is the king of an age, right? So there's a different Manu for one age, right? So Manu seems to be providing his desana, his teachings on how a divine king should lead, not just a king, right? But a divine king. And with that comes various ritual prescriptions, various theological positions that one should hold, right? And not just maintaining peace or developing one's country in an economic sense, but also in a more of a theological sense as well, with all these restrictions on caste and so on. So could you speak more on that?
Yeah, I think what's instructive here is that the explanation that the Manusmriti gives for its existence is very similar to something that Bhishma says in the Mahabharata about, it's a sort of cosmological argument. I'm thinking this is a summary of the Mahabharata, Book 12, Section 59, verse 29. Bhishma basically details the decline of the Krita Yuga. So there's these 4 yugas, these 4 ages in kind of, we could say, the Hindu cosmology. And at the end of every one, the world falls apart. But the next one is worse. Yeah. So the Krita Yuga is like perfect. And it does collapse, but everything is really wonderful. But so what happens as these yugas begin to decline is that knowledge of the Vedas begins to disappear. And when that happens, royal sovereignty is also weakened. Yeah. So there's this equation between the Vedas disappearing and people not being governed in the right sort of way. And he explains, a great Brahmana sage then composes a monumental treatise, about 100,000 verses, detailing the 3 aims of life. This is the Trivarga. Yeah. Artha, which we just covered, Dharma, which we're doing now, and Kama, which maybe we'll get to a little later, the Kama Shastra. But at the same time, the text Bhishma is discussing also sounds a whole lot like the Arthashastra. And so, like we said, immediately in this view of the cosmos, kingship takes on a very central role theologically. But the reason that Dharma Shastra exists is because the universe is inherently degenerate. Like something is wrong. Yeah. If it weren't so bad, then we wouldn't need Dharma Shastra to tell us. Yeah. We would just feel it very naturally. But because it is so awful, we should be very grateful for explaining all of these things that are natural.
Yeah. So as the divine king, right, one of the prescriptions in the Manusmriti regarding caste is relating to degeneracy again, right? So we talked about the age deteriorating, but then it's also the people that deteriorate, right, within the ages. And one of the ways that happens is through intermixing of the castes, is what the Manusmriti says. And one of the roles of the king is to divide who one can marry and who one cannot marry, and if there's a child, then how they should be classified or treated, and so on. And it's incredibly sort of theologized, right? Even the simple act of marrying or having sex is incredibly theologized as to who can do what. Compare that with something like the Arthashastra, where courtesans and prostitutes are part of the king's sort of arsenal where he can gain money from, right? The Manusmriti sort of shies a little bit away from this how do we put this slightly sexualized way that a king should behave, and then he's all this noble king that enforces dharma among people and who should marry whom and so on, and prohibits in some sense, outside marriage, especially relating to the guru's wife. So what's going on with this idea? What's this juxtaposition between the usage of, let's say, more of these sexualized aspects of society as what a king should be using versus a king should be forbidding?
I mean, there's a sense that in the Arthashastra, the king is ensuring the conditions materially for people to be able to be moral. Yeah. Because if their kingdom is taken over, or they don't have food, or they don't have money, nobody can be moral. And in that sense, it's a very practical kind of set of concerns. The Manusmriti is concerned with this like trickle down morality, wherein if only the king is perfect enough, there's like enough perfection in him that it will trickle down to everyone else. It's not clear whether he's like a good example for other people, or if just like by the power of being so perfect, like it makes like magical changes in the universe and everyone is better. But I mean, I think that's the model of the Manusmriti, and that makes it much more, we could say,
idealistic.
Yeah, much more idealistic
than the Arthashastra, which would be more practical and less of an idealized version.
I mean, what strikes you reading the Manusmriti? Do you find it interesting? Do you find it boring? What about it is?
I mean, it's interesting in a sense of it forms a basis of a lot of the systems that we have in place right now, right? Including the Varna system, including the whole 3 aims of life, which is very important. That's an essential. So you have Artha, Kama, and then what's the other one? Dharma. Yeah, Artha, Dharma, Kama, and in some sense, all of these are still dharma in some sense, like because Artha is a dharma that one should have in order to fulfill sort of material needs, right? And then one goes up the ladder towards dharma as this religious, moral sort of rule that one should follow. So all these three stages are given sort of equal, almost importance in some sense. And it's not like dharma completely overshadows artha. And so a lot of Manusmriti assumes that once you have the material needs fulfilled and once you have all the sort of desires fulfilled, then one will naturally move towards the dharma, and then that will lead them towards moksha or liberation or whatever. And that's kind of a little bit of the vibe I get from the Manusmriti, is it's trying to get people to act good enough so that they can hopefully achieve moksha, because that's the main goal. Whereas you don't get that in the Arthashastra. And Manusmriti, like you said, it has like this trickle down morality of some sort, where the king, if he's just good enough, then everybody will start to emulate him, be righteous. If he just follows the eternal law enough, then people will start following the eternal law. So it has this utopian almost aim, right, of not just fulfilling sort of the material sort of goods, which it sort of idealizes in some sense also, but then using that as a stepping stone towards theological purposes. And that's kind of what is the feeling I get from the Manusmriti, and that's kind of what makes it interesting. And maybe it's because of this that it's become quite a controversial book too nowadays, because it claims that a utopia should have sort of divisions of caste, for example, division of varnas and so on. And then that is the way to achieve moksha or liberation, right? And so there's this divine king who's giving out instructions on how one should lead so as to liberate oneself. And that includes social orders that one should reinforce, specific purificatory rites, initiation rites, marriage rites, right? So it seems a bit more theological in its aim. And in that sense, I guess it's that is kind of different from other Dharma-shastra texts also. And I mean, we get other texts as well. For example, Bhishma, like you mentioned in the Mahabharata, he speaks a lot on the similar kind of things that the Manusmriti also speaks on, right?
And the Manava Dharma-shastra is not the only one. Yajnavalkya has another.
Yeah,
this
exactly.
becomes a whole genre in the first millennium.
And you get other niti shastras, right, on how just anyone should be, not just the king. And usually what I find with these theological bent texts is they run into the problem that a king should be both compassionate and shouldn't have mercy towards people who sort of cross him, right?
But in terms
or cross
of
the dharma, let's say.
The punishment aspect, like in terms of when he should show mercy, there's a really interesting... there's a punishment section. Here we go. Punishment for thieves, book 8, or chapter 8, verse 314. A wise thief with his hair loose should go to the king confessing his theft. I have done this. Punish me. And carrying on his shoulder a pestle, a club of kadira wood, a spear with both ends sharpened, or an iron rod. So he should go present himself in front of the king. The verse I omitted here, and I believe this is verse 315, is that if the king doesn't punish him, the king is failing in some awful way. And that it looks like mercy, but it's not mercy. It's a failure. And then verse 318, when men who have committed sins are punished by kings, they go to heaven immaculate, like virtuous men who have done good deeds. So it's not just that he like deigns to punish. It's that there's actually something like, you should like punishment. There's something so special in the king doing it that it has this sort of salvific function. Just spooky. And I think this goes back to, Olivelle has a very interesting thesis in his introduction to a very good critical edition and translation of the Manava Dharma-shastra. Olivelle says that, I mean, like we discussed, we don't see dharma in the Vedas. The earliest place we see the word dharma as like an advertisement for what your religion should be is with the Buddhists. And the Buddhists are in a very easy position because they say, we have a dharma and it's new. You know, it's new and it's different and it's revolutionary. And when you ask them, why is the world so awful? They'll say, well, because no one knows about our dharma yet. And when everyone knows it, we'll get there. And this puts Brahmanical religion, if you want to look at it this way, it puts Brahmanical religion in a bizarre position where, well, they need to have a dharma too. But their dharma is the way that things have always been and continues. It's like the norm.
And then you get the idea that it's a sanatana, that it's always existent, right?
Exactly. But so then they kind of have to explain, well, if dharma, if the right way to be is the way that we've always been, with a king and with a caste system and with traditional relations between men and women, then why are we upset? So then they have to, part of the crux of this is that we're not committing to the system hard enough. That's what the Dharma-shastra offers us kind of against the Buddhist version of Dharma, is that if the king commits harder, if everyone is kind of clear in their roles, and if we're only more established in the system that we currently have, then we can push away from that degeneracy and we can move into a world that actually is the way it should be. So I think an important key for understanding the Dharma-shastra is the fact that Buddhism and Jainism, they cause problems, intellectual, moral, religious problems for North India and beyond, because suddenly a lot of things have to be recontextualized, and the way of life that had always been or had been for 100 years needs to be rearticulated as a utopia, when clearly it's not a utopia. So what do you do with that?
So, a nice segue into Buddhist ideas on dharma, right? The earliest sort of side we get is the Pali Dhamma, right? And then it's very famous in the triple refuge that you take. You go to refuge to the Buddha, you go to refuge to the Sangha, you go to refuge to the Dharma as the Dhamma, right? And the Dhamma in that sense is different from what we've been talking about as this moral sort of way that one should be, or this moral code, or so the foundation of everything, and it becomes more of a teaching, right? So when Buddhists say Dhammam Sharanam Gacchami, like, that's not them saying that I go to refuge in some abstract rule of ethics or morality that they're following. It's through the teachings of the Buddha.
That's what's left of him. In a big way, that's the Buddha's body.
Yeah.
Some traditions will say.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's explicit in the Mahayana where with the Buddha has a body, the Dharmakaya, where he has the body of Dharma, if that makes sense. Right. And that's what the crux of his teaching is the Dhamma, right? And in that sense, we get a different view of what the word Dharma means. So now we have, like, from the Arthashastra, we have this idea of the Dharma of practicality, let's say, right? And then we have a sort of a more theologized version in books like the Mahabharata with Bhishma and the Manusmriti, talking about the way we should be in each sort of section, right? So coming back to the four stages of life, right? So you have the brahmachari, who is a student, right? And then how he should be a student, he should be celibate, he should spend his time reading the Vedas, reading other Vedangas, gather as much knowledge as possible until approximately the age of 16, where he leaves that life to go into the life of a householder. And the dharma of a householder is very different from the dharma of a student, in that sense of a brahmachari, where the dharma of a householder is getting food, rearing cattle, gathering wealth, right? Just gathering material goods that one needs to survive, and that's artha, right? And that includes progeny as well, and that's where kama comes in, with desire, where fulfillment of desire is the dharma as well. So it's not this renunciate idea that people have whenever they hear of somebody being dharmic. It's not this idea that one should renounce everything and leave everything and renounce and just focus on the one truth that exists, a God or whatever. It's clearly not that in the Shastras as well. There's clearly a development of the aims of life that one should follow, and karma is a central part of that, and includes satisfaction, not only sexual satisfaction but other desires that one might have.
A sense for fine things.
A sense for fine things, yeah, exactly. Of luxury too, right? And then once one has sort of gone through that, then there's dharma, which is now the more oriented towards a religious aim, towards liberation, etc., etc. So we have a text that's supremely practical, let's say, in the Arthashastra, right? That focuses on all the practicalities. And then we have a text that says, okay, now these are the things that you should be focusing on, right? At whatever stage in life you are, depending on what caste you are, right? So you have different dharmas according to that. And then we get texts that talk about dharma as if it's solely religious activity, right? And maybe that would include a lot of the Buddhist texts where the word dhamma means the teaching, and it's usually a religious teaching in that sense. It's not only moral or practical. And the Buddhists also, they push the word to another area where dharma starts to mean activity or phenomena, right? In a sense of even just saying all dharmas are sort of anatta or without self. It definitely does not mean that all religions talk about there being a non-self or there being an atma or whatever. Anatta in Pali. So it's saying that all phenomena are without self, or all activity are without self. So there's a connotation, or more cosmological, let's say, or a more ontological idea on the word dhamma, instead of it being like a prescription of rules. And so, as you know, how would you see that as a...
This is tricky. I mean, sometimes in Buddhism, you get because things have moved into Pali words can have very, very
Yeah.
different senses, and so perhaps it's not necessarily coming from dharma. But when it is, it's this sense of like a dhamma is a discrete moment of experience. So every time you see something, every time you have an experience, every time anything registers in your mind, that's a dhamma. And so a part of me wonders if it is just a sort of a polemical reaction against like a reclaiming of the word, because if there's anything that Buddhism is, it's sort of offensive. That the Buddha's life story is offensive because in the prime of his life, exactly when he's supposed to be a grihastha, he packs it all up and he goes into the forest early. When a moment he's not supposed to. So the sort of polemics over what Dhamma is and what it should be go right to the very core of Manu's vision of social reality, because the Buddha upturns that and philosophically upturns it as well in terms of how he uses Dhamma.
So
I've totally blanked.
Yeah, it's okay. So the Buddhists have their own spin on it, and then after that, maybe the Hindus start incorporating dharma as more of this cosmological activity where the planets follow their own dhamma or dharma and so on. And now, towards the end of it, we talk about dharma as purely a theological activity where it's bhakti, or it's a devotion towards God, or it's a devotion towards religion or something. And the prime example of this is Bhagavad Gita, and maybe we could just end on the Bhagavad Gita with a few quotes and just talk briefly about what dhamma means or dharma means in the Bhagavad Gita and how it defines dharma.
Exactly. Well, so the context of the Bhagavad Gita, is it's about halfway through the Mahabharata. It's in the middle of that's at the very beginning of the horrifying war.
Yeah, the Bhishma
Parva. On the battlefield, the Bhishma Parva. And Arjun has asked the chariot rider to take him out into the middle of the battlefield between the two parties. The war is about to start, and Arjun just wants to sort of look over everything that's happening. Of course, many of the enemies on the battlefield are his family members, and he's feeling very conflicted. So there's this beautiful verse, section 1, verses 28 through 32. Krishna, I see my kinsmen gathered here, wanting war. My limbs sink, my mouth is parched, my body trembles, the hair bristles on my flesh. The magic bow slips from my skin and burns. I cannot stand still, my mind reels. I see omens of chaos. Krishna, I see no good in killing my kinsmen in battle. Krishna, I seek no victory or kingship or pleasure. What use to us are kingship, delights, or life itself? This seems directly in relation to the Manusmriti, which tells us that we have responsibilities to our families, and the Arthashastra, which tells us that kings just need to be comfortable with war.
Yeah.
You can also frame it in terms of the Manusmriti again, where it's a kshatriya's duty to wage war, and so Arjun has to do that. And so he's very discomforted. Everything he knows about dharma is telling him that he shouldn't fight this war, or at least to make him feel conflicted. And what Krishna offers is an alternate vision of dharma, wherein in fact the world is so degenerate, and things have gotten so confusing. And in some ways, Dharma Shastra is so inadequate that Krishna has come and he's taken a human form as Arjuna's cousin and then brother-in-law to tell him what the right thing to do is. And so the Bhagavad Gita becomes an exercise not only in like thinking through moral issues, but in absolute faith to a God that won't lead you astray. And Krishna is telling him, fight the war.
And so his duty is to fight the war. His dharma is to fight the war, and he gives a lot of philosophical explanations as to why the war should be fought, and so on, and how trust should be placed on him. And dharma becomes this this idea of a faithful duty that one has to perform, a performative sort of act for devotion, right? And so it's really interesting to me how the idea of dharma in the Bhagavad Gita, especially with the 4 yogas and so on, which we don't have time to get into probably, but how that develops and how dharma is now if you ask somebody to translate dharma, immediately they'll say religion or a belief or something, when it's really complicated. And I think maybe we've gotten a little bit close to dissecting what dharma means, right, through these few texts that we've examined, and it's not really clear in every context what the word dharma means, and hopefully the viewers can get a little bit of an idea on how complicated the word dharma is, and how it's very contextual.
And we can close maybe on one really beautiful section of the Bhagavad Gita where Arjun is finally convinced. He's finally sort of taken refuge in Krishna. This exemplifies how aesthetic, how sort of beautiful and sumptuous bhakti is, as opposed to dharma and the Manusmriti. Arjuna has finally accepted Krishna, and he says, I bow to you, I prostrate my body. I beg you to be gracious, worshipful Lord, as a father to a son, a friend to a friend, a lover to a beloved. O God, bear with me. Bhakti is the locus of all the different relationships you have in your life, all the different sorts of affections you can have. In one way, a certain sort of camaraderie, a love, that's dharma. Yeah. And I think that's nicer than the Arthashastra. We can leave our viewers to decide.
Okay. Yeah. Nice chat we had.
Thank you.